This is the In Focus podcast from The Hindu.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the In Focus podcast. I'm your host G. Sampath. Last Sunday, Israel carried out a large-scale preemptive airstrikes on southern Lebanon. These strikes were in response to what Israel claimed were preparations by Hezbollah to strike Israel. Now, Hezbollah still went ahead by launching a barrage of rockets into northern Israel. And as per media reports, the tit-for-tat cross-border exchanges have left 1 dead in Israel and 3 dead in Lebanon. And they have raised fears of the conflict escalating into a wider regional war. But Hezbollah leader Sayyed Hassan Nasrallah has said that the strikes on Israel undertaken to avenge the killing of their commander Fuad Shukr had been completed, and they are now satisfied with the way things are. And Israel too has indicated that they are happy with the strikes they've carried out in southern Lebanon. So tensions have simmered down for the time being. But 11 months into the Gaza war, what does this kind of heightened military exchange signify? Can the asymmetric war that Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas are waging against Israel help in any way in terms of moving the needle towards a ceasefire? Or is it giving diminishing returns as the war goes on? We discuss all these questions in what is turning out to be another endless war in West Asia. And joining us today is Stanley Johnny, the Hindu's International Affairs editor. Stanley, welcome back to In Focus.
Thank you, Samba. Thanks for having me.
Stanley, to start with, can you give us a quick overview of this entire cross-border exchange between Israel and Hezbollah on the August 25th weekend? Everybody thought they were on the brink of a wider war. Somehow they seem to have pulled themselves back. So how do we interpret this within the broader context of military exchanges between the two sides since October last year?
Sambat, we have to understand that a slow-burning war has been going on Israel's north between Hezbollah and Israel since October 8th. So immediately after the Hamas attack and Israel's retaliatory attack on Gaza, Hezbollah started attacking Israeli positions, first in Sheba farms and then in northern Israeli villages, especially in the Upper Galilee region, which has also displaced some 60,000 Israelis from the border region and close to 1 lakh people in southern Lebanon, the Lebanese in southern Lebanon. So Nasrallah says he will continue to attack Israel as long as Israel's war on Gaza continues. So this is Nasrallah's way of declaring solidarity with the Palestinians who are under attack. But at the same time, you can see that Nasrallah was very wary of breaching any red lines. Like, he is ready for a war of attrition. He is not ready for an all-out war with Israel. And if you look at Israel's response, you can see similarities in Israel's response as well. So Israel has been carrying out retaliatory strikes in southern Lebanon against Hezbollah, but at the same time, Israel is not ready to start an all-out war against Hezbollah. Israel is not planning to launch an invasion of southern Lebanon, not in the immediate future. So both sides are continuing controlled aggression across the border, but both sides are basically shying away from launching an all-out war. So it was against this background that the killing of Fuad Shukr happened. This happened on July 31st, because July 31st, Israel carried out 2 major assassinations. First, Fuad Shukr was killed in an Israeli airstrike in Beirut, and then Ismail Haniyeh was killed in Tehran. Both happened on the same day. And Nasrallah promised to retaliate against the killing of Fuad Shukr. Last Monday, what the Israelis did was that after carrying out the attack, Israelis said that it was largely a preemptive strike. But immediately after the Israelis started attacking Hezbollah, Hezbollah launched some 320 Katyusha rockets and drones towards Israel. So you can see that, it was not really preemptive if you look at Hezbollah's response. But the Israelis say that Hezbollah was planning to carry out a massive attack. And, Hezbollah was planning to carry out a larger attack. And then Israeli airstrikes had somehow limited the impact of Hezbollah's attack. So this is what happened. So Hezbollah's point of view, Hezbollah has carried out a retaliatory attack for the killing of Fuad Shukr. Israel's point of view is that Israel has dealt massive blows to Hezbollah's capabilities in its preemptive, quote unquote, attack. And then after that, both sides again. I mean, if you look at the curve of the conflict from October 7, both sides were exchanging fire, but both sides were not willing to go for an all-out war.
Stanley,
So immediately
I was looking at some of the graphs on this these exchanges from October 7th, and it seems when the numbers seem to be like heavily tilted in one side. Israel has, I think, launched some 7,800 missiles or whatever, rockets, etc., compared to about 1,500 or whatever on average from the Hezbollah side. So this is like completely. But even though one sort of reading, if you read the newspapers in general, you get the impression that Hezbollah has been constantly sort of irritating Israel with these strikes. The actual numbers turn out to be like many fold times greater from the Israeli side into Lebanon.
That's true, and that's not surprising because Israel always relies on greater firepower as a deterrent, to use it as a deterrent. And Israel is also a bigger, stronger, conventional military force. So Israel will use greater power against its rivals, whether it is Hamas or Hezbollah. But the question here is that whether Israel's use of greater power is actually acting as a deterrent. Is it helping Israel to prevent attacks from its enemy? That's not happening. So, I mean, this is an asymmetric war. This is not a war between two conventional forces. So I think we have to look into that asymmetry, into consideration, because Hezbollah is a smaller power, but it uses asymmetric tactics to hit back Israel. And Israel is a bigger power, and it relies on conventional fire to prevent its enemy from launching attacks against Israel. But what we are witnessing is that, yes, Israel is using greater power, but still, despite the use of greater power, Israel doesn't have any easy solution to prevent Hezbollah from launching rockets into Israel. So irrespective of what the Israelis are doing, and this is the message Nasrallah is also sending. This is what happened with the latest attack. Israelis called it a preemptive attack. A preemptive attack is something that preempts its enemy. But immediately after Israel carried out its massive airstrike, which according to Netanyahu, almost 100 Israeli airplanes participated in the strike and targeted thousands of Hezbollah, missile launches, rocket launches, etc., etc. And I don't know whether it is true, but even if you take that, into consideration, even if you look at it seriously, still Hezbollah carried out 320 missile attacks rocket attacks into Israel. So the reality here is that despite Israel's reliance on greater firepower, Israel doesn't have deterrence against Hezbollah.
Right, but just to flip this whole perspective around, Stanley, I mean, I understand what the point you're making about, this asymmetric war and how Hezbollah has sort of shown that this entire preemption means nothing, and Israel doesn't seem to have anything in terms of an effective way to stop it from launching those rockets into Israel. But at the same time, if you look at the larger objective of this asymmetric war, which is to bring Israel to agree to some kind of a sustainable ceasefire in Gaza, I mean, that the needle doesn't seem to be moving at all in that sense. When you keep firing these rockets, Hamas also, the quote-unquote axis of resistance, right? I mean, if you take into account Hamas, Iran, the Yemenis, the Houthis, and Hezbollah, and groups in Iraq and so on, they keep firing these rockets, and Palestinians and Lebanese keep dying. So the asymmetric war is not having any impact at all in terms of the Israel and the US, and especially the US's unconditional support for Israel. So where are they going to go with the asymmetric war? I mean, maybe does Iran need to think of something else?
So I think the question is not whether Hezbollah is launching these attacks to force Israel to agree to a ceasefire, because Israel is ready for a ceasefire on its terms. Hamas is not ready to accept Israel's terms. Hamas is also ready for a ceasefire on its terms, which is not acceptable for the Israelis. The point here is that both sides are okay with the idea of ceasefire, but Israel wants to continue to its presence in Gaza, which is not acceptable for Hamas. And Hezbollah started firing rockets into Israel from October 8th. I don't think it was actually to force Israel to agree to a ceasefire. It was two things. One is to continue to declare Hezbollah's support for the Palestinian cause, which I think is important for Hezbollah domestically to maintain its political base. That is one thing, because that is one of the most important ideological positions of Hezbollah. Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah says Hezbollah will remain a resistance organization as long as Al-Quds is occupied. This is his rhetoric. Al-Quds is Jerusalem. So he is actually, staying true to his rhetoric by carrying out this attack. That is the political calculation. Secondly, from a tactical point of view, I don't think Hezbollah thinks that Hezbollah can force Israel to agree to a ceasefire. Rather, what Hezbollah is trying to do is to needle Israel, is to continue to hurt Israel. Hezbollah knows that Israel is not going to end its Gaza operation. But Hezbollah also thinks, Hezbollah puts its money on a bet that Hezbollah thinks that Israel doesn't have the stomach to launch an all-out invasion of Lebanon because Israel is stuck in Gaza. So as long as Israel is stuck in Gaza, Hezbollah is actually trying to hurt Israel. And which is, okay, it is true that it is not going to have any massive impact on Israel's strategic thinking. But if you look at the whole situation, take a step back and look at the whole situation, practically Israel is facing two front challenges and it continues to fight. Israel doesn't have peace in the offing. So this is what Hezbollah also wants, or this is what perhaps Iranians want. Iranians are basically sitting on the fence and seeing how Israel is fighting different forces. Israel is fighting Hamas in Gaza for the last 11 months. Hamas is a relatively tiny militant organization, and even after fighting 11 months, killing 40,000 Palestinians, destroying the whole of Gaza Strip, Israel still hasn't managed to defeat Hamas. And then on the northern border, Israel has to continue to fight Hezbollah, because Israel at the end of the day has seen 60,000 people, Israelis being displaced from Upper Galilee region, and Israel cannot send them back to their homes as long as the war continues. And Israel also doesn't have any easy military options, because if it hasn't defeated Hamas in 11 months, it's not going to defeat Hezbollah, even if it launches a direct invasion of southern Lebanon in many, many months. So Israel doesn't have any easy military options either. So I think this is the strategic calculation here. So first is political. Secondly, from a tactical point of view, Hezbollah wants to continue to needle Israel, and and Hezbollah is ready to take that casualties, which anyway it is, it is taking, but it will continue to fight. I think that is the message they are trying to send.
Right. You're speaking of Iran, Stanley. Iran has also suffered a lot of, casualties. But it's pretty senior military leaders have been assassinated by Israel, and that too on Iranian soil. And of course, now we have seen that Hezbollah has said that it has completed its retaliatory response for the assassination of Fuad Shukr, but Iran has still not taken any action, which is of course widely anticipated, for the killing of Ismail Haniyeh on its soil. So how do you think it's going to retaliate? The last time it retaliated, we saw it launch a barrage of strikes, but it did telegraph them well in advance so that Israel and Israel's allies could sort of shoot them all down, more or less all of them. So how do you think it's going to be? Do you think it's going to be a similar kind of a calibrated a PR version of retaliation, or is it going to be something which is really painful? And how is it likely to happen given the domestic turmoil that Iran is in currently with its new regime still sort of settling in?
Yeah. So if you look at the statements issued by Iran's leaders, Iran is supposed to strike Israel because, even in the past when Qasem Soleimani was assassinated, Iran said it would retaliate, and Iran had launched missile attacks towards an American military base in Iraq. And when its embassy was bombed by the Israelis on April 1st, 2024, Iran had vowed to retaliation, and within 14 days, Iran launched its missile and drone attacks towards Israel. Of course, it had let the Americans know that it was launching the attack. It wanted to launch the attack, but it did not want an all-out war. And the Americans put together a defensive coalition that shot down most of the Iranian projectiles on April 14th. So again, this time after Ismail Haniyeh was killed, IRGC had immediately blamed it on the Israelis. And both IRGC commanders, Iran's president, Masoud Pezeshkian, as well as the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, they have all vowed retaliation. But Iran hasn't done anything so far. But if you look at the statements, I think the Iranians would do something. What they are going to do or when they are going to do, we don't know. But there were also reports that Iran was actually holding back. There were reports in Channel 4, reports in Times of Israel, saying that Iran was planning to carry out an attack, but Iran held back as the ceasefire negotiations were going on. But ceasefire is not actually happening. Today, Israel announced a 3-day pause in several parts of Gaza, but there is no major comprehensive ceasefire. And Hezbollah carried out its attack. So, if you ask me, I think the Iranians would do something. I don't know what they are going to do or when they are going to do, because after pledging retaliation, Iran at the end of the day remains the only country that attacked both the Israelis and the Americans in West Asia in the past. They had threatened to attack, but their attacks are different. They carry out the attack. They don't. It's evident that Iran doesn't want an open war with Israel, irrespective of the rhetoric by the Iranian leadership. Iran doesn't want an open war with Israel. Hezbollah also. Hezbollah wants to continue to retaliate, but Hezbollah doesn't want to fight an all-out war. But Israel, on the other side, if you look at Israel's response, like, for example, the bombing of the Iranian embassy in Damascus, the killing of Ismail Haniyeh. So,
would it be fair to say that Iran doesn't want an all-out war, Hezbollah doesn't want one? They are interested in a ceasefire, but Israel wants an all-out war. Would it be correct to say that Israel wants an all-out war in the region, provided there is US backing, of course? Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. I will put it this way. Iran wants a war. Israel wants a larger war, but only if the United States is willing to fight it. I don't think Israel alone can fight Iran, Hamas, Houthis, Gaza, Hezbollah, everybody. No. Israel is, at the end of the day, is a smaller country. We have to take that into account. But with the US support, now the US is supplying weapons, of course. That's why Israel manages to continue to fight Hamas over the last 11 months. Without American supplies, it would find it difficult to continue to do it.
So is the US part of, are there US individuals as in US representatives part of the peace talks, ceasefire negotiations?
Yes, US is trying to sponsor the talks, both in Doha and Cairo. The US is involved in negotiations. Tony Blinken had
if you look at, most of the analysts, Stanley, whoever is discussing this entire process, they're, especially from the West Asian region, not Westerners, they all direct their hopes and their whatever, their remarks in terms of a ceasefire possibility, not at Israel. They direct them at the US. They said it's basically up to the US,
They're saying this because you have to put pressure on the Israelis. The Biden administration's policy is that the administration would continue to support Israel's war in Gaza. It would continue to supply weapons to Israel so that Israel will not face any battlefield challenges. But at the same time, in ceasefire negotiations, it will treat Israel as an independent entity so that Israel will take the decisions on its own. It won't put any pressure on the Israelis. Pressure in a sense, okay, you can make a statement publicly saying that this is how I apply pressure, but that's not how it works, right? But the Americans are not ready to take any strong decisions in terms of weapon supplies, in terms of political or defense support for Israel. No. They keep saying everybody from Joe Biden to Donald Trump to J.D. Vance to Kamala Harris to Tim Walz, everybody is committed to Israel's defense. You go and listen to them. So Israel is kind of a domestic issue in the United States. So unless you apply pressure, in the past, American presidents had used pressure, whether it is, even Reagan or Jimmy Carter, Eisenhower, even George W. Bush, they all had used the pressure tactics to force Israel to accept or make compromises. Biden, for some strange reason, did not do it at all. And Biden was outbitted by Netanyahu at every turn of the conflict. Because immediately after October 7, Biden went there, and declared his full support for the war. And if you look at Biden's foreign policy, especially in West Asia, Biden doesn't want an all-out war. Biden will continue to support Israel's operation in Gaza, irrespective of the human toll. 40,000 people were killed. 2.3 million people have been displaced. Now there is a cholera outbreak in Gaza. People are starving. There is not enough food. All the entry and exit points are controlled by the Israelis. Nothing bothers the Biden administration. Nothing whatsoever. They will continue to support Israel's military operation, but they will continue to host talks between the Israelis, Hamas, Qataris, and the Egyptians, hoping that there would be some ceasefire. It's simple to understand Biden's policy. He supports Israel, but he wants a ceasefire if the Israelis agree to a ceasefire. This is the US approaches. But of course, Netanyahu doesn't want a ceasefire, because you should also look at the conflict from Netanyahu's point of view. He went to war promising to destroy Hamas. Now the IDF says they can't destroy Hamas. The IDF spokesperson said they can't destroy Hamas. So there is now growing criticism even within his cabinet, right? So Netanyahu cannot accept a ceasefire without meeting his objectives. He is not meeting his objectives.
Sorry to interrupt, Netanyahu, of course, he wanted to eliminate Hamas in Gaza. They are still in Gaza, but before having achieved their objectives in Gaza, they have now launched a major military operation in West Bank. What has prompted it, given that the focus all along has been on eliminating Hamas from Gaza? What is going on in the West Bank side of things now, which has suddenly seemed to have become an active theater?
Yeah. So the focus of the Israeli operation in West Bank is Jenin, basically Jenin, Nablus, Tubas, and Tulkaram. So Jenin has always been a hotbed of militancy, even from the time of the Second Intifada. Jenin at one point of time was the stronghold of Fatah, Abu Mazen's party, Yasser Arafat's party. But Fatah has declined. Fatah doesn't. I don't think Fatah holds any major influence in the Palestinian society now, though Fatah continues to rule the Palestinian Authority. But over the years, from the Second Intifada, you can see that Hamas and the Islamic Jihad had grown in strength in Jenin. So now the militant organizations, they have formed an umbrella group called the Jenin Brigade. And they operate in and around Jenin, including in Tulkaram and Nablus. This Israel sees as a potential challenge. This also shows the growing challenges the Israelis are facing, because in Gaza, you are still fighting and you are witnessing emergence of militancy in West Bank, because earlier in the past, West Bank resistance was largely, organized resistance was largely peaceful. They would throw stones at the Israeli soldiers, they would hold protests, sit-ins, etc., etc. And then there were isolated knife attacks. So in the West Bank, which is tightly controlled by the Israelis, the Palestinians do not have the kind of weapons which Hamas had in Gaza, which was run by Hamas, though Gaza was blockaded by the Israelis. West Bank, the situation was different. It's divided into 3 zones, and there are some 540 checkpoints in West Bank, and all the Palestinian towns are kind of, capsuled in the West Bank. From one town, if you want to go to the other, you need to go to the Israeli checkpoints. Still, the Israelis are witnessing emergence of militancy in and around Jenin. So you can see in the past few months, Israelis had carried out multiple military incursions and operations in Jenin, targeting the Palestinian militant groups. There is now, a host of militant groups operating in Jenin under the umbrella of the Jenin Brigade. And the Palestinian Islamic Jihad is the most powerful outfit now operating in Jenin, not Fatah, not even Hamas. So Israel sees a new, potential challenge in Jenin, which many people call a mini Gaza. So the current operation shows that Israel wants to kind of, deal with this rising challenges. So Gaza, the war is already going on. And in the West Bank, Israel is facing a new wave of militancy, which is trying to kind of tackle with its new military incursion. This is what is happening in the West Bank right now.
Right. A lot of things going on at the same time for the Israeli leadership, political leadership, to sort of take in and handle at the same time with their military and defense forces. And you have the Gaza war 11 months into it, then you have the Hezbollah coming at you. Then you have, of course, the West Bank militancy to handle. And then, of course, there is also the general population of Israel, which is not very happy with Netanyahu. So where do you see this all going, Stanley? Some concluding remarks on the situation as a whole, with, say, the next few weeks to months?
I don't see any immediate end to this conflict, because I fail to see any strategic thinking from the Israeli side. I think that despite the use of heavy force, Israel is struggling to meet its objectives. Okay, if its objective is to kill as many Palestinians as possible, destroy Gaza, clearly it is on road to meet those objectives, because killing 40,000 people in 11 months is huge. It's massive. It's only because it's Israel that they are getting away with it, because they have the support of the United States. I don't think any other country would manage to get away with this kind of violence. But if their objective is to defeat Hamas, if their objective is to ensure peace, if their objective is to restore deterrence, no, Israel is not restoring deterrence. They started fighting Hamas to make sure that the southern border is safe. Now even the northern border is not safe. And there is this, this possibility of an Iranian attack hanging in the air. We don't know what the Iranians are going to do next. So Israel is facing a lot of security challenges. And I would say that the security challenges Israel is facing have become a lot worse over the last 11 months, have become a lot worse over the last 11 months. But there is still no clear-headed talk. Israel says it would continue to fight because it can't back off. At this point, if it backs off, Israelis think that its challenges would multiply, and also then the Netanyahu government would collapse. Because internally, you see, Netanyahu's far-right allies are now becoming increasingly, extremist in their views. Ben Gvir repeatedly visits Al-Aqsa and challenging the status quo, basically igniting, basically putting oil into the fire. So both internally and in its neighborhood, the challenges are rising, and I don't see any strategic approach to tackle these challenges. But Israel seems willing to continue to fight. So we are not going to see any end to this war in the near future, I think.
Right, that's a pretty grim prognosis, Stanley. I mean, there is, as you said, a lot of security challenges for Israel, which are mounting day by day, month by month, and much higher than what they were last October. But at the same time, there doesn't seem to be much of a strategy except more and more killing, more and more reliance on maximal firepower to sort of bulldoze their way into whatever victory doctrine that they are pursuing. So that's how things stand as of today. Thank you so much, Stanley, for coming on board In Focus once again, sharing your thoughts and insights. Absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
In Focus will be back soon with analysis of the biggest news issues. In the meantime, you can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and other platforms. Just search for In Focus by The Hindu. We'll see you soon.